So I recently got my hands on an original Xbox again, and let me tell ya, I absolutely missed having one of these around. Sure, some of my physical Xbox games are backwards compatible with some of the newer systems, but not all of them are, and these were the ones I missed playing the most. I may have been more of a fan of PlayStation and Nintendo's exclusives growing up, but I can't deny that the original Xbox had some charming exclusives as well. Yeah, back when Xbox had exclusives. You don't need me to tell you how much of a cultural reset the original Halo was. But I also had a really good time with some of the lesser talked about exclusives like Brute Force, which I've done a whole video on. I may not talk about it much on the channel, but I have dabbled in the fighting game genre. I loved Virtua Fighter 4 growing up, and I've played some of the 2013 Killer Instinct revival. And more recently, I've gotten into Street Fighter 6. When it comes to Xbox exclusive fighting games, the first one that probably immediately springs to mind is Dead or Alive 3. And for good reason. That game is good. So good, in fact, that it may have overshadowed some of the other ones that came exclusively to the Xbox. And today, I'm gonna pull out 3 of these Xbox exclusive fighting games that time, and everyone else, seems to have forgot. Are they hidden gems, or is there a reason why people don't talk about them these days? Well, let's do something fun and find out. Let's take a look at some forgotten Xbox fighters. Starting off this video, we've got the only teen-rated game of the list. This is Kakuto Chojin, Back Alley Brutal.
Kakuto Chojin.
Developed by Dream Publisher and published by Microsoft Game Studios, now known today as Xbox Game Studios. Dream Publishing is a branch studio of Japanese developer Dream Factory, which included members of both Dream Factory as well as Microsoft themselves. Released in November 2002 in North America and January 2003 in Japan, Kakuto Chojin actually began life as a tech demo made to show off the graphical capabilities of the then unreleased Xbox, before the decision was made to turn it into an actual full-fledged game. And not only that, the game was developed by former members of the studio behind the Tekken series, including its creator, Seiichi Ishii. Wow, with that kind of pedigree behind it, you think this game's gonna be incredible, right? Well, let's get into that. You get your combos, your grabs, your throws. You even get a special attack that you can use by pressing the B button on the Xbox controller when your health meter turns red. The hook here is that the lower your health is, the less time you have to wait until you can use it. You can do some real damage with this special attack, so there's a bit of a risk-reward system at play here. Also, holding the left trigger allows you to move in a 3-dimensional space. This can prove useful for repositioning yourself, but it can also leave you wide open for your opponents to hit you. You've probably by now noticed the words Kakuto and Chojin underneath the character names in the footage here. Well, starting the game, you have access to every character's Kakuto fighting style. Beating their story mode will unlock their Chojin fighting style, which changes up a character's moveset. So basically, you have an option of selecting a character's costume as well as their moveset in the beginning of matches. And that's pretty cool. Character stories and bios are locked to the game's manual, so unless you read it, you're gonna be a bit lost on a character's motivation for being in this Fists of Fire tournament until you beat the story mode as that character. I suppose this was par for the course for fighting games back then, but even Tekken on the PS1 had endings with cutscenes. And considering that this game was made by ex-Tekken devs, you'd think they would have capitalized on it here. It would have been cool if the characters had some kind of banter with each other before a match, giving you more of an idea of who they are and rivalries that they have with others. Most you get here is a text crawl when you beat the final boss. Story mode has you go up against all 12 of the other fighters, and for the first 6 or so fights, it's a pretty comfortable ride. Then you'll hit that one opponent who will just steamroll you. And for each character you play as, this wall character will be different. You might have an easy time fighting this character on one playthrough, but then in another, they will just mop the floor with you. That formula doesn't change no matter who you're playing as.
God damn it!
One cool thing that the game does do, though, is if you're playing the two-player versus mode, whichever character makes the first hit, their theme music will play for the duration of the round. Each character has their own theme song, and this will come up a bit later in the segment. Oh, you best believe this is going to come up again later. For a game with the subtitle Back Alley Brutal, there's not that many actual back alleys in this game. As a matter of fact, a lot of the arenas in this game aren't very visually interesting in my opinion, especially when you compare it to those found in Dead or Alive 3, which came out just a year earlier. And what are these names? Stairway to Hell? Sacrilege? Under Heaven? Are these supposed to be the names of fighting game stages or tracks from an early 2000s nu metal record? The only other game modes on offer here are the survival mode, where you take out as many opponents as you can in a 3D arena before you get KO'd, and capture the crown mode, where you and up to 3 other players fight to hang onto a crown, and the one holding onto it when the timer hits 0 is the winner. Aside from the unlockable Chojin fighting styles and 1 extra character, the game is pretty light on extra content. Aside from those, you have everything available to you out of the box, and what's here, while certainly not the worst fighting game I've ever played personally, does feel a bit basic. It feels more like a game from the previous generation, and when you're debuting your fighting game on the most cutting-edge console on the market, especially one that already has a very impressive fighting game on it, comparisons are gonna be made. And made they were. Kakuto Chojin got absolutely destroyed by critics when it was released. Japanese critics liked it okay, but American critics and review outlets, not so much. I remember Electronic Gaming Monthly was particularly underwhelmed by it. One of the 3 reviewers going so far as to calling it the worst fighting game that they've played in years at that point, while scoring it a 3.0 out of 10. But you also have to remember that this was when a game would cost you $50, so I can see review scores at that time being more critical. For me personally, Kakuto Chojin isn't a terrible game by any means, but I don't feel like the gameplay or the characters do enough to really stand out from its contemporaries. Though I can see this maybe being someone's favorite fighting game if it was like their first. You could definitely do worse. You just could also do better. If you see it on eBay for like $15, then yeah, I can recommend at least checking it out. And getting it off eBay is the only way you're going to be able to play this, because Microsoft never re-released the game on any digital storefront. As a matter of fact, the game was actually pulled from the shelves. Some of y'all watching were probably waiting for me to bring this up. Remember how I said each character has their own theme song? Well, one of them is for the deeply religious Middle Eastern character, Assad, and his theme song contains some of this really awesome chanting. Well, it turns out that this chanting is composed of verses from the Quran, which sparked major backlash from the Muslim community. The story supposedly goes that an Arabic-speaking member over at Microsoft pleaded against releasing the game with those lyrics, but they went ahead and did so anyway, thinking that nobody would notice it, and as a result, the game sparked major controversy in Islamic communities, including the Saudi Arabian government. The game would only be on store shelves for a few months before Microsoft withdrew it from sale. Wow, it's really no wonder no one remembers this game if it got pulled from store shelves just months later. Alright, so for this next game, we're actually going to have to go back in time a little bit. How far back exactly? November the 20th, 2001, just 5 days after the release of the Xbox. Yeah, so we have a launch window title with this next one. What we're looking at here is Kabuki Warriors. Not to be confused with the WWE Ladies Wrestling Team, which I'm only just now finding out about as I'm writing this. This is a co-development between Lightweight, the developers of the Bushido Blade series on PS1, and Genki, who are famous for, the Jade Cocoon series? And published in North America by Crave Entertainment, who published the North American release of... Hey, Jade Cocoon, there you go. So this game's campaign is called Tour Mode. When you start it up, you and however many players you have will enter by pressing the A button. If you're playing single player though, then yeah. The object of the game is that you are a part of a traveling kabuki theater troupe, traveling from the Japanese cities of Edo to Kyoto. The hook here is that instead of your usual kabuki theater fare, your actors travel across the country and fight other actors on stage. As in, like, with real weapons. Or, at least I think they're real. They draw blood. Even the wooden kendo swords used by some of the characters draw blood. Or maybe it's fake blood and it's all just part of the show. Who knows? It sounds kinda awesome, doesn't it? Well, when you first start out, your roster of actors/fighters looks like this. A set of 3 of the most basic, nondescript placeholder character models you could ask for. Sure, they do okay in battle, more on that later, but this is also where another gameplay mechanic comes in. Whenever you win a best of 3 set of fights, you're actually given the opportunity to choose a character from the opponent team to recruit into your own 3-slot roster. And this is how Tour Mode progresses. At the map, you're allowed to select a stage up to a certain point that your travel expenses allow. You gain money for travel expenses by winning fights and using your taunts, which can be done by either pressing the Xbox's white button for a short taunt, or holding it for a long kabuki dance style taunt, which will cause the audience to throw money at you. This taunt will leave you wide open for an attack, so you'll have to know when and where to use it. It's also used for something else that I'll cover in just a bit. The more shmoney you rack up, the further you're allowed to progress on the map at a time to reach the end goal of the city of Kyoto. Since this mode can be played with up to 4 players apparently, you can take turns in between matches to see who can make it to Kyoto first. I honestly don't know, I played all of the games in this video solo. Oh, speaking of other players, something really funny that I saw is that the back of the box says it's 1 player only. It's not. So there are different characters aside from the generic dudes in all white, but do they control any differently? Do they have any special skills? Well, for starters, the game only has 1 button for your standard weapon attacks, that being the A button. The combo differences come from where you're tilting on the left stick when you're pressing A. There aren't any quarter circles or anything like that here, which can make the combat system feel a bit basic compared to other fighting games. As a matter of fact, I know this isn't going to be a direct comparison, but I was almost kinda sorta getting Smash Bros. Vibes off the gameplay. Like, a little bit. But that's really more so because the controls felt a little similar to me, and because of how simple the gameplay is. Like it isn't directly lifted from your usual tournament fighter style game. That being said, the movement controls felt a little bit stiff at times. You have a roll move, which is generally used for getting behind your opponent, and it changes the direction you're facing. If you mess up, this leaves you wide open. It's nothing a double tap in the direction you want to face on the stick can't fix, but accidentally doing it and having your back exposed for your opponent to land free hits is a bit jarring. There are 12 characters in the game that all have an alternate costume. I guess the back of the box decided to market that as the game having 24 characters, which isn't 100% true. You'll mostly see samurai, and it isn't until about 2/3 of the way through the game before you start to see actual kabuki-style characters, but they're here. Some fall under the speedy short sword wielders, some use long swords and fight by taking wide swings, and then there's one who fights with a parasol. So we're gonna bring back up an older topic, that being the taunts that I mentioned earlier. Not only is it used for getting the crowd to throw money at you, it's also used to charge this meter down here that I'm sure you've noticed by now. This is your special meter. Yours is always red and your opponent's is always purple. When your red meter starts flashing, you can execute a special attack by pressing the black button. And I only found that out by complete accident because none of the games that I bought for this video came with instruction manuals. Seriously, what the hell? Do people just throw these out? What's wrong with you? Oh, also, all the menu confirmation sounds sound like this. So be prepared to hear that a lot. The 2 playthroughs I did of Tour Mode for this video took me about 45 minutes each. There are 53 individual stages in the game, but the game does not require you to play through all of them. The money you gain from fights is essentially used to unlock a chunk of levels, and the bigger your pool of travel expenses, the further along the map you can go. Not one time during my playthroughs did I face any danger of running out of money, as the game is rather generous with its payouts. The only thing you can use the money for is travel expenses, so as long as you're making any kind of effort to win and butter up the crowd, you're always gonna have enough. Which isn't hard to do, it barely requires any real conscious effort. That was something this game was actually heavily panned for. It is piss easy. That, and once you've played Tour Mode once, you've really seen all there is to see in that mode. There is also a time attack mode where you select a character and fight your way through the other 11 as fast as you can. That and the versus mode, of course. The only time I ever saw any real differences in the backgrounds was in time attack mode. In my normal playthrough of Tour Mode, nothing stuck out to me. You're locked in a 2-dimensional plane, and the backgrounds tend to look a bit samey and start to blur into each other. I can see that being a big drawback of this game too. Not enough stage variety. I know they're going for a theater look, but I feel like they could have done something more with it. The stages in time attack mode look awesome. Why couldn't there have been more of that in Tour Mode? The game currently has a Metacritic score of 32, and just like with Kakuto Chojin, it got some blisteringly negative reviews at the time of its release, winding up on the worst games of 2001 lists of many gaming publications and websites. But I don't know, I kinda had an alright time with it. With this next one, we have reached the final game on our list. Another one published by Microsoft Game Studios, and the only game on the list made by an American developer. And like with Kakuto Chojin, this is another game with something of a pedigree behind it. So this lovely game comes to us from none other than John Tobias, the co-creator of a little indie game. It's pretty niche, you may not have heard of it. It's called published by Microsoft Game Studios and developed by Studio Gigante. We have Feng, Fist of the Lotus. Okay, dude, I remember the months leading up to this game's release. Microsoft was really pushing for this to be the next premier fighting game for the Xbox. Xbox released demos for this in magazines, and that's how I remember first experiencing it back in the day. I could see Microsoft wanting their own in-house fighting game that could stand alongside the Dead or Alive series, which by this point had made itself a comfortable home on the Xbox. Maybe this was their thought process behind greenlighting all of these fighting games. After Kabuki Warriors stumbled out the door and Kakuto Chojin failed to really make a splash on store shelves before the controversy made them recall it. I think Microsoft was betting a not insignificant amount of their chips on Feng here. And with John Tobias at the wheel, it had to be a surefire hit, right? Well, let's take a look at it. Well, I can say out of the 3 games I've looked at today, this is definitely the one with the highest production value behind it. Even now, well over 20 years later, this game still looks incredible. The character models sport a very high amount of polygons, and the arenas are varied and have some truly jaw-dropping detail, colors, weather effects, breakable objects, and environmental damage, and that unexplainable original Xbox visual charm that I love so much. You know the one. I just love how original Xbox games look. It's just the way that games on this very specific console at this very specific point in time looked. I just love it. While still maybe not as overwhelmingly gorgeous as DOA 3, it's still an excellent looking game for the Xbox. One that came out less than a year and a half into its lifespan. So, unlike the first two games, Feng actually has a story in its single-player campaign. Hell, characters even have in-game biographies that you can read up on to get a better idea of who they are and why they're here. You choose between the Pale Lotus, the good guys, and the Black Mantis, the villains. The game is set in the fictional city of New China. Two tablets, the Yin and the Yang, contain riddles that reveal the hiding places of the treasures of the Pale Lotus. These treasures are said to be used as bargaining chips for the old gods to grant wishes to whomever possesses them. The Yin is still in the possession of the Pale Lotus, but the Yang has been stolen by the evil Black Mantis sect. Choosing to play as either the Black Mantis or the Pale Lotus, you'll select a character, and their quest will have you fight the 6 characters of the opposite sect. Each character has their own 6 artifact pieces that they will win when defeating each opponent. When I first started playing, I thought that the combat system felt a bit sluggish. Like there was maybe about a half second of input delay. It definitely didn't feel as fluid as the other 2 games in this video, and there are going to be times when you'll be asked to tilt a direction on the stick while pressing 2 buttons at the same time. Simply mashing buttons won't get you very far, and that's by design. Feng is a game aimed at people who are already well versed with fighting games, and not tourists like myself. So it should come as no surprise that I got my ass kicked. A lot. Even when I turned the difficulty down to its lowest setting, some of these fights I was just struggling with. Definite skill issue on my part. This game damn near requires players to learn its combat system and perfect it in order to stand a chance in the single player's later stages. This game's single player mode certainly isn't afraid to hand you your ass. One tactic you have is your ability to leap off walls or swing off poles by pressing the right trigger into your opponents or fling them into environmental dangers. But your opponents can just as easily do this to you as well. Since the game is on a 3-dimensional plane, I found my opponents dodging me whenever I tried doing that.
Are you shitting me?
By successfully landing hits, every character gets their own unique special attack, which is gained by building up their chi meter. But this chi meter has another use, and that ties to one of the game's most unique and widely remembered mechanics, the limb damage system. Overuse of the block, or being flung into destructible objects, can result in a character's arms or legs being damaged. Whenever this happens, punches or kicks, whatever was damaged, will do 50% less damage for the duration of the round, or if that character uses their chi to restore their damaged limbs, which can be done by pressing the left trigger. If you're going to use your chi moves, you'll need to make sure your character is at a good enough distance. Not too close, not too far. If they're too close, they can be interrupted and you'll lose your whole chi meter. Too far, and the attack may not land. Despite being made by one of the co-creators of Mortal Kombat, and the game having an M for Mature rating, don't expect there to be anywhere near as much blood and gore in this game. Sure, there's enough blood here for an M rating, but you won't exactly be ripping other characters' heads off. You will, however, see tons of bruising and tattered clothing the more a character gets beaten up. For a game from all the way back in 2003, this is damn impressive. Speaking of Mortal Kombat, some of these characters do seem to be at least a little inspired by those found in Mortal Kombat. Yeah, some look like they could have been lifted right out of a 6th generation MK title.
Somebody come get her, she dancing like a stripper. Somebody come get her, she dancing like a stripper.
I think Feng might be a game better enjoyed with friends of an equal skill set. You might have more fun duking it out with a buddy than with AI opponents that show no mercy. I don't have a ton of complaints with this game, but I do feel like I, personally, would enjoy it a lot more if I was simply better at it. Despite coming out after the launch of Xbox Live, the game never received any compatibility with the online service, nor did it launch with any kind of Xbox Live features. I really think that if this game had online multiplayer, it would have had a better longevity than it had, even if only slightly. While critical reception to this game was more positive than the other two that I featured in this video, it still didn't exactly receive a glowing response. The game's Metacritic score sits at 65, meaning that reviews were more mixed than the other two games we looked at today. I have to assume that the game didn't sell all too well either. This would be one of only 2 games that Studio Gigante would ever release, the other being WWE WrestleMania 21 in 2005, also released exclusively for the Xbox, and also directed by John Tobias. That game, however, received a harsher critical response, and tragically, the studio folded shortly after its release. If I had the opportunity, I would love to have a chat with John Tobias and see what his thoughts are about this game some 20-odd years later. I'd love to hear what he thinks about it now. And there you have it. We looked at 3 forgotten fighting games for the original Xbox. I know some of you might be a bit disappointed that I didn't look at Kung Fu Chaos for this video, but I wanted to keep the theme of this video to be more of the traditional tournament-style fighting game that we're all more familiar with. Besides, I could always look at that game in the future now that I have a working Xbox again. Let me know if you'd like to see me cover that game someday. While these 3 games may not have had the most positive review scores in the world when they first came out, hell, some of them were downright hideous, I personally had a pretty good time playing them for this video. Remember, a major factor in these games getting the critical review scores that they got is because back then, these games cost $50 each. A big reason why some games today get the reception that they get. The most I spent on any of these games was about $26 for Kakuto Chojin. The other 2 cost me less than $15 a piece, which certainly ain't bad. If you yourself ever plan on giving any of these games a go, though, then I hope you still have a working original Xbox. Neither Kakuto Chojin nor Feng were ever made backwards compatible with any of the other Xboxes beyond the original, though apparently Kabuki Warriors was made compatible with the 360. Not so sure about the systems beyond that, though. Honestly, your best bet if you want to try any of these games for yourself is to hunt down an original Xbox if you don't already have one. Though, saying that out loud, that might be a bigger financial barrier of entry than it would have been back in the early 2000s, depending on what kind of luck you have tracking down all the hardware and software. Before we wrap this up, I just want to say that it's a real shame that as far as Xbox exclusive fighters go, it's kinda slim pickings now. After Dead or Alive 4, that series went multi-platform. We do still have the Killer Instinct reboot, though. Granted, it came out all the way back in 2013, and all of the characters they're ever going to make for it are already out, but it's at least backwards compatible with Windows 11 and the Xbox Series consoles. But who knows when or even if Xbox Game Studios will ever want to take a crack at publishing a fighting game again. The time does seem right, though, with the successes of games like Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8. Hell, even Virtua Fighter is coming back. But I think that's gonna do it for this video. If you made it this far, then thank you so much for watching. I felt like putting together another smaller video while I continue to keep everyone waiting for the video on Primal for the PS2. It's still coming, I'm still working on it, and I do want to apologize again that it's taking so long. I'm gonna see what I can do about ramping up production on videos in the new year. But until then, thanks again for watching. Consider leaving a Cash App donation if you really like what you see and want to support the channel. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing if you're a fan of the kinds of games I like to cover on this channel. Till next time.
Oh, finally you're here, bitch. You got $1?